Now, just briefly, to allow lots of time for discussion, I might touch briefly on some of the massive challenges that our organisation faces and that human rights people face, ironically, in Britain in 2006. Now, of course, the war on terror is a massive challenge in itself. The war on terror. Not the atrocities of terrorists, but even the concept itself, the war against this concept, terror. A war against an abstract noun. And we have two quite significant problems with the war on terror. The first, of course, is that unlike a conventional war, unlike the Second World War, for example, the war is indefinite, and whilst in the midst of a conventional war, a war may be indefinite, during the Blitz, people of London didn't know when this would stop. In a conventional war, we the people know that at some point we will be able to verify the end of this emergency with our own senses. There'll be a white flag, there'll be a conquest, there'll be a peace treaty, and the momentary or lengthy moment of exception will pass and will come to an end. And of course, in wartime, people do give up some of their rights and freedoms. They do give in to a bit of exceptionalism, sometimes too much. But we will know when the war is over. With the war on terror, how will we ever know? When can a war on terror ever end? Now, I should say that it's very dangerous to quote Orwell when you're the Director of Liberty, because people expect you to, and therefore they will stop listening the minute that you talk about Orwell. But to me, Orwellian is not too many CCTV cameras or this policy or that policy or identity cards or also Orwellian is the abuse of the language, the permanent state of emergency, the new normal, the war on terror. And in my view, a permanent state of emergency isn't an emergency at all. No matter how dangerous the times, a permanent state of emergency is a new state of being. And it's a state of being without the democratic framework and the rights and freedoms that are the basis of our society itself. And frankly, how will we know when it's over? Are we to wait for George Bush the 23rd to tell our great-grandchildren, one more push, guys, and the war will be over? Well, I'm not prepared to regulate our society in quite that way. There's another problem with the war on terror. The one I've outlined is the obvious dove's concern with the war on terror. Too much exceptionalism, too much sacrifice of rights and freedom's name. But there's another problem as well. That revealed itself in the video diatribe recorded by Mohammed Sadiq Khan, the lead suicide bomber involved in the 7th of July atrocity, when he said, amongst other things, "We are at war, and I am a soldier." Now you too will taste the reality of this situation. The war on terror that allows a murderer, a terrorist if you will, to call himself a soldier. An approach that was rejected by British governments of both colours for years in the context of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And an approach that is now adopted on both sides of the Atlantic at grave cost. The war on terror has produced, in truth, many exceptional policies that are very hard to stomach and that have a very, very harsh consequence for certain people. I'm talking domestically now, I'm not talking about Iraq and so on. We now discuss torture as if a little bit would be all right, as if it's possible to look the other way, as if torture is a negotiable, a qualified right as opposed to an absolute protection. And of course we've seen indefinite detention without trial, even in Belmarsh prison here in Britain, and still in Guantanamo Bay. But there are other ways in which rights and freedoms are being compromised that don't affect a few people acutely, like torture or internment, but affect everyone just a little bit and possibly change the nature of society itself. Privacy is such a concern. Now, privacy is a fascinating and phenomenally difficult concept to grapple with. We all know when it's completely absent, back to Orwell. A society where you feel constantly watched is a society that ignores the dignity, the basic individual human dignity from which all human rights and freedoms spring. But it is, by definition, a qualified right. Who in this room would suggest that the police should never be able to get a warrant to search somebody's home? Sacred though somebody's home might be, I think most of us would agree that if you thought somebody had a kidnap victim or had explosives or other serious contraband in their home, it would be legitimate for the police to get a warrant and search the home. I feel the same way about telephone taps and all sorts of other privacy interferences that are necessary and proportionate and regulated by law in a democratic society. The problem is this: at a time when even absolutes like torture are on the table as negotiable, qualified rights like privacy or free speech are approached in a rather cavalier fashion. And so we're told that identity cards are a great idea, even though they cost billions of pounds and are very expensive to our personal privacy. And we're told, essentially, that if you've nothing to hide, you've nothing to fear, which is a wonderful slogan for a great authoritarian age in which it seems we live. But the truth is, we all have something to hide. It doesn't have to be criminality. Just privacy, just personal dignity, just your conscience, your expression, all of these other rights and freedoms that can't really survive in a society where you feel constantly watched. And of course, as with other rights and freedoms, the petri dish for this experiment becomes the disenfranchised minorities first. So under an ID card scheme, as we've seen it in Germany or in France, it's not mainstream white society that feels particularly put upon. It's the Turkish guest workers in Germany who feel constantly stopped for their identity cards. It's Algerians in France. And the people whose privacy is being interfered with most in this country are disenfranchised groups, in particular children and young people. And we've been too complacent about all of that, and we don't have the strong privacy constitutional protections that they have even in continental Europe.